Being in a tech ecosystem, we don't have a lot of women. For me to be here is proof that women can do it, women can be leaders, and I hope to inspire other women, especially young African women, to be bold and courageous, follow their passions, and when they're offered that seat at the table, to take it and take the front seat at changing the African narrative.
Since I joined Impact Africa Network, my thinking has really been expanded. I now for sure believe that if I put my mind and time into something, I can bring life-changing ideas into fruition.
The culture at IAN encourages continual learning. This makes someone to source for outlets for learning, opportunities for growth in order to continually ensure that they do the best at their job. Also working with Mark, who has this great vision for changing the African narrative. He wants to take us on that journey with him, pushes you to the limit, pushes you to want to be better.
My thinking has changed from looking for problems to being a solution provider. That way, I will stop worrying and actually do something.
I really enjoy being a leader and at the same time being a student. At Impact Africa Network, there's a lot of continuous learning and development. So it gives you this hunger for knowledge. It pushes you to be the best possible version of yourself, because you cannot change the African narrative being anything less.
At Impact Africa Network, we bet on the women. We believe women are much more effective at leading and nurturing complex people-centric systems, and startups are the quintessential people-centric systems of our day.
As the Women of Impact Africa Network, we will be hosting a livecast series with global female leaders and change makers, having conversations with the intent of inspiring a new generation of female leaders just like ourselves. If you or someone you know should be part of this conversation, we would love to host you. Talk to us.
You can also be a change maker by helping us create more leadership opportunities for women by donating today. IAN is a registered U.S. nonprofit charitable entity under Section 501c3.
Right. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're watching us from. This is Joy Dinda, your host for today. I am the Partner and Donor Relations Manager at Impact Africa Network, and I'm really, really glad that you could spare your lunch break to join us today. And for everyone watching from across the world, thank you for making time. This is the Power to Our Women Livecast series. It's brought to you by Impact Africa Network. Impact Africa Network is a non-profit startup studio in Nairobi. We aim to give young Africans the opportunity to participate in the digital transformation of Africa as creators and as owners. We do this by providing a 12-month innovation fellowship where young college graduates work on well-vetted ideas under the guidance of a leadership team and a mentor network. The goal is to develop innovation leaders and to launch startups. This livecast series is where we have conversations with global female leaders and change makers from across the world, where they share their stories with the intent of inspiring a new generation that will change the African narrative, of course. And it stemmed out from our founder's belief, Mark Karaki's belief, that women are much more effective at leading and nurturing complex people-centric systems, such as the startups that we create and span out of our studio. Today, I have a new co-host. I am really, really happy to introduce to you Victoria Chabet, a very charming and energetic young lady. She's an innovative.
Thank you so much, Joy. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. My name is Victoria Chabet, and I am in Impact Africa Network. I work under the fundraising team, and it is such a privilege to be here to host with you, Joy, because this is the place where mindsets are being shifted, especially women, because of all the amazing experiences and the knowledge that we get to hear from the phenomenal women who come to this platform. And today we are so honored to have Dr. Laila. She will be joining us on this session, and I'm going to do a brief introduction of her, but I hope I will do justice, Dr. Laila. But I will get to give you a chance to introduce yourself. So, Dr. Laila was raised in Kenya, Namibia, and Somalia, and she is a serial entrepreneur and investor. Currently, she chairs the Africa Leadership Initiative East Africa and is a non executive director in Absa Bank of Kenya as well as Centum. Both are listed on the Nairobi Stock Exchange. She is admitted to practice law in Kenya as well as Maryland and New York. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Planning and Public Policy from the University of Oregon, and a JD and an LLM from Cornell University, and a doctorate in law from the Stanford University. She, an interesting fact, has been named one of the top 20 women to watch out for in Africa by the Times of London. So we are so honored to have you, Dr. Laila. I will let you introduce yourself to the audience. Karibu sana.
Asante sana. Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here with you, Joy and Victoria. I'm glad the day has finally come. And as I was telling you, Impact Africa Network is one of my favorite organizations. We're so aligned on believing that there's a new story coming from Africa and that entrepreneurs and women and young people will lead that change. Yes, so as you've heard, I'm Laila Macharia. I was trying to think about how to describe myself to summarize it, but as you've said, I'm a lawyer by training. I also have lived in many different African countries. I was raised mostly in Kenya, but my parents moved to Namibia and Somalia at some point, and we moved with them. In addition to that, I've lived in the US for over 14 years. I did most of my schooling and my early work experience there. And then since returning to Kenya, I've been building businesses and over time also starting to work on the business environment. I'm also a wife and a mother of two young children. So I thought, how do I bring all of that together? And so I've summarized it. I usually say I'm an investor, I'm a mentor, and I'm an African. So for the investor, I invest not just in businesses and in ideas, but I also really like to invest in people. When I see a hope or a dream or an idea, I really like to pour into it and see if something can sprout, right? So I'm a believer and an investor in dreams. I'm also a mentor, and by this, I also listen to people. I support them. If somebody has somewhere to go, I can't do as much as I like one-on-one, but I'm trying to look for platforms like this to be able to do it more at scale, because we're also limited. But I'm also a mentor in being a parent, right? All of these are different ways in which we mentor each other, right? Mentorship is not one way. And then the last thing is I'm an African. And part of it is because I grew up in Kenya. I love Kenya, but I also see that Africa, united and as a market and as a civilization, is really impactful in the world and that we have a lot to say on the global stage. So Africa for Africans, but also for everybody else. So investor, mentor, African. Joy, we can't hear.
My
Joy,
heart
we can't
that
hear you.
oh no.
It's all
One
right.
sec.
Dr. Laila, it's such an honor to have you here. And I'm so glad you talk about mentorship because we are all about mentorship at Impact Africa Network, just as Joy gets to adjust her mic. And as we can start, I'll just start with the first question. Um, Dr. Laila, what was your key driving force to becoming an entrepreneur? And how have your entrepreneurial motivations changed since you started? Since the first time you started?
It's a great question. I think, like many people, I started my first business when I was 15 in high school. And I was creating artistic work for sale. And at that time, the motivation was mostly creativity. So there's something I wanted to say to the world. There was something artistic inside myself I wanted to share with the world, and then was able to charge for that. So that was my first business. Uh, Over time, I started moving towards a motivation of building wealth. And it's something I'm still really passionate about, building wealth for myself, but also taking others along with me and building wealth for other people. And then over time, even as that was happening, now I started thinking about wealth and employment as employment creation. So, business as employment creation. How do we create jobs for everybody and spread this wealth to greater groups of people, especially people who are just starting out. But then after doing that for a while, I've come to really shift my emphasis over time towards an ecosystem development view. Because once you start doing business, you soon realize, especially in a context like this, that you can't focus on business development without making investments of time, of ideas into market development, helping make the ecosystem easier through skills, through finance, through policy for all the entrepreneurs coming up, so that even as you do business, it's easier for all of us to grow our businesses together.
All right. So I'm loving that you're talking about an overall perspective in terms of creating wealth for people, and it's such a good thing to hear. And I'll let Joy answer ask you the second question.
All right. Thank you, Victoria. I hope you can hear me now.
It's
Are you
better.
guys able to hear me now?
Yes, okay.
Awesome. Um, I like that your entrepreneurial, interests and motivations have changed, across the years to now building ecosystem impact, which is very, very close to us. But just to take you back a little, you mentioned that you're a serial entrepreneur and, you build businesses and, you've done this over and over again. So how do you generate new business ideas every time?
Yeah, it's a good question and something to think about. But what I do know is that I focus on problems. So, solving problems. So, I don't see business ideas as a flash of inspiration and creativity. It's more, is there a big, naughty problem that is worthy of me to try and solve, right? So, I like things that have to do with creating jobs where there's joblessness, or helping the fact that people don't have access to dialysis, or helping people make wiser decisions, or combating mental health. That's the meaty things that all of us are really struggling with and want to solve. And from that, if I meet an entrepreneur or an organization or somebody who's solving something that big that I say is worthy of me because it's a hard problem, then I do get inspired. And from there, then the first thing is it must always be inspiring, it must always be large and meaty. And then from there, now I can start considering other things like who is the founder, what's the business model, and those kinds of things.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that you focus on solving problems. So
Mm.
awesome.
All right.
Yes, Victor.
Dr. Laila, I really love the point where you said a problem that is worthy of me to try and solve. I mean, that speaks volume about how you think about yourself, how you view yourself, and it's amazing. And I want to just let you give us a little bit of that. How do you think about yourself when you talk about worthy of me? Because you talk about problems that are inspiring, that are large, and that those meaty problems, they can be very scary to other people, to me. So, how do you get the courage to go into these big problems to try and solve them head first?
Wow, that's a great question. So the first thing is that I do have a life mission that is very clear. And I always encourage people to think of their life as a vocation, as something that they are here to do before they die. Um, and once you have that, then the next question then really becomes about, if you have a vocation, every other role you have it's not so much about I have this job with this organization. It's more that this organization or this role or this job or this volunteer task is really part of advancing my bigger life mission. So that's one. Then over time, I've actually done a lot of education. I've got quite some experience and expertise. I have a lot of passion. And all of those things, when they're put together, are really a package that I have as a bag of resources, or as some people say, maybe a quiver, arrows in my quiver that I can use to attack the problem. So I feel I'm well equipped to really make a difference in some of the areas I'm interested in. But I always encourage people, as you say, if it's scary for you, let's say something happens and you get an opportunity and you're appointed to a very large job, which for you will represent a very big step forward, a lot of growth. I always encourage my friends and say, you have been prepared for a time such as this, right? So, all your education, the fact that you were a firstborn or a middle child, the fact that you lived in this neighborhood where you had to jump over potholes, the fact that you grew up in the slums or even on the other side of town, all of those experiences together form a package that you can then bring with you that will inform you in this big role that you're taking up. So everything that has happened to this point has been preparing you to be excellent at this appointment that we all want to give you. So I really encourage you, because I've experienced this as somebody who tries to elevate people and encourage them, where you believe in the person you're appointing, but they're the ones who have all the doubts, who are not sure that they're ready. So I always encourage you to
Yeah.
remind yourself, I've been prepared for a moment such as this.
I mean, that's so amazing, Dr. Laila. When you talk about, of course, you've mentioned your life mission and you've mentioned your experience. But when you were talking about experience, I was wondering, so like I'm 26 and I want to start this huge endeavor. And Dr. Laila is talking about experience. But now that you're saying that, you encourage people to think about all the things that they've been through from their growing up. So I think that's very important to hear today. So on that note, I'm going to just ask you the next question. This is related to what you're talking about. I know that you have mentored different entrepreneurs over the years. And as a budding entrepreneur, like I'm starting out, what advice would you give me?
So I get asked this question a lot, and there's a lot in that question. But I think some of the top things, if you're thinking of starting a business, the first thing I would say is don't believe the hype. There's quite a lot of illusions around entrepreneurship. There's a lot of romanticization of entrepreneurship right now in the ecosystem. And I encourage people to really ask, why is it that I want to go into business, and be disciplined about the way that you approach the business. There's potential to lose quite a bit of money. It'll take time. There's days you want to cry. There'll be happy days, but there'll also be very challenging days. So it's not something that you just do because everybody's doing it or because everybody's talking about it. The first thing is really understand what it is you're setting out to do. And linked to that is to value your time and your money. Because just because you're young doesn't mean you have time to waste, right? So it doesn't mean that you do something that's not working for 8 years or 10 years, just being disorganized, being casual. Value your time. It's your life energy. Every day you live, you won't get back. So try and be deliberate about what it is you're going in for and whether or not it's what you expected. Are you getting what you needed? Yeah. Um, and then after that, manage your ego. And I'm not being negative entirely about entrepreneurship, because there are great things about it too. But there are things you can get into and then realize that the image I had or the impression I had is not right. So have the courage to not get trapped up by your ego and to pull out. Yeah. If it's, there's times when quitting can be noble. Yeah. It's the best thing you can do for yourself, your family, even for your customers, if you're really not good at what you're doing, right? So those are some things that can be very helpful in the way that you approach business. We can talk a bit later about what if you do discover that this is the right business for you, it's meeting your needs. What do you do then? But as you consider whether to go in, those are some of the things I would ask you to do. Think very carefully, be deliberate. Don't do it as if it's something that comes naturally, because it really is something, if you're going to succeed, that needs money, it needs partnership, it needs expertise, and you really want to go in with quite some humility.
You're absolutely right. I love
Amazing,
those
Dr. Laila.
points, right? Yes, and we have to manage our egos. I think that's the main, the main
Yeah.
takeaway from what you just said. Because you're
Yeah,
happy
there's a joke
about
that people tell, or
it.
stories about how you can go. There's some people who go overseas. So you leave in our days, it's not so much, now, but when somebody was going overseas to study, everybody would changa money. There'd be this huge harambe. Everybody would be dressed up. The person would get on the plane. The whole family would go there, extended family, to wave them away. And let's say you then go to America, but you're not succeeding. You don't finish school. You don't get a good job. Sometimes when you think back, the best thing is to go home. But there's people who stay because they don't want to admit that this thing has not worked out. They don't want to come and admit to people that that investment might not have worked out. So don't be that person. Whatever it is you do, if it's not working, pivot and go to the next thing. The best is yet to come. The past is gone.
Absolutely, absolutely, you're
I
absolutely
love
right.
it.
Yes, and just to conjoin that, I know you're a serial entrepreneur, but you're also an investor. So, just as related as an investor, how do you decide which business is worth your money and time?
Mm. So we talked a little bit about this. The biggest is it a problem I want to solve? Am I excited about the business, its scale, and its potential to change things, to really move the needle? There's some markets in which you can do something that really changes people's lives, that changes the economy. And there's some other markets where that same business doesn't make that much of a difference. There's already people doing it. The problem is mostly solved. And what you're contributing is mostly marginal or iterative. So for me, I do like things that are solving a big problem. But then once you do that, I think I look at the entrepreneur. If I'm investing in a founder, that's really important to me. And then the other part is really the size of the market, right? So, we all talk about the customer. If you have a customer, almost everything, you can work backwards from that, right? You can finance it. There's different solutions then you can come up with, but you need a customer. And by a customer, I mean somebody who is ready, willing, and able to pay for what you're providing. And then there has to be enough of them that your total addressable market is worthy or able to absorb a big business, right? It's not just a small group of people who do it. I also like businesses that are cash flow negative. And this I've learned over time by making mistakes, which I hope we can talk about my mistakes later. There are many and they're big. That's a whole show. Um, so you want cash flow negative businesses, which means, sorry, working capital negative businesses, meaning where people pay before they use, right? So you're not over borrowing in order to provide the product or the service, and you're always short of cash. And then finally, I prefer businesses that have low government involvement or low regulator involvement. There's some businesses in which at every step you're so heavily regulated that you're always talking to government, getting licenses. I try to avoid those. I like simpler businesses where the flow of money in and out is straightforward and simple.
It really is something we are really struggling with, especially as young Kenyan businesses. The regulation part can be quite discouraging, to say the least, especially when you're just trying to get off the ground and you have to, do all these five licenses that the government requires.
Mm,
So yeah,
mm.
that's a brilliant strategy to have. And just to follow that up, what has made the biggest difference among your successful investments?
So there's two sides to it. So the first one is the founder. It really matters who your partner is, and as Victoria was saying, it's not necessarily that they have to be the most experienced or they have to have a whole lot of money. It's not that. It's really about their grit, their character, their faithfulness, their passion for the business, and then in addition to that, the whether they think big and collaboratively and win-win. So if you have that kind of person, and I tend to think quite long term in my businesses. I'm usually, I explained that they're big, hairy problems. So they're not usually things that you solve very quickly. So you really want somebody who understands that businesses take time to build. You might make mistakes and pivot. That's the kind of founder I want to work with. And then the second part, which is really important, is product market fit. So you really want to be in a business where the product that you're offering or the service that you're offering, the timing is right. There's a market that wants it. People are excited about it. And we always use the metaphor of flying off like hotcakes, selling like hotcakes. So you want to really make sure that you position yourself in a place where something is selling really well. People really want your product. And it's not so much a vanity project where it's just something that you like, it's a passion for you, but it's not really something the market is ready for. I don't believe that being first mover advantage is always an advantage because the first mover usually makes mistakes and other people learn from their mistakes and move faster. So you really want, again, to be very disciplined in the way that you approach the market that you're bringing your product into.
Yes, Victoria, I can see you smiling.
I mean, Dr. Laila, you're blowing my mind. I love everything you're talking about. I really love the fact that you really look into the founder because I believe people have a lot to offer other than, where they come from. They usually do have a lot to offer, and it's really inspiring to and encouraging to hear that you look at the founder. So, for those who are listening, I mean, if you have a problem you're trying to solve, if you're trying to do something, you can do it. And Dr. Laila is encouraging us today that it's not about your experience, really, but it is more about the things that you've gone through to get you to where you are. Dr. Laila, I want to go into a really interesting topic, and I know you love this question because you're a woman and you've been an entrepreneur, and I just want to hear you being in that front line. How has that experience been for you as a woman, particularly?
Yeah, again, a big question and a big discussion, but I'll try and summarize. So I've loved being an entrepreneur. I love being a woman. I believe there's never been a better time on this planet to be a woman, and it's getting better every day. I think my great grandmother would be flabbergasted to see what's going on, with women now, and how free and how many opportunities they are. There's still a long way to go. We have to keep pushing because it's not yet, full parity as far as discrimination and the like. But I really encourage women to think about what is it you can do? What is it you do have? In scripture, it talks about what do you have in your hand, right? So that's a much more empowering thing to focus on than so and so doesn't think I'm worthy. That kind of thing can really set you back and dissipate your energy. So always be in a position and always pick the narrative that is more empowering, that makes you want to get out of bed and do great things. Um, Having said that, of course, there's challenges that women are facing. One of them is that you will come up against bias, right? You will move. There's still people in our environment, and it's not just men, right? It's both men and women who aren't used to seeing women free or seeing women in places of power or in leadership or opportunity. And so people will say silly things. They'll say ignorant things. And and you've got to expect that, right? You don't get completely decimated because somebody has said something to you who is just ignorant, right? And doesn't know of what they speak, right? So what you've got to do is when you're out there, expect that, but also be ready not to let it make you disintegrate, right? Understand that a lot of these people, somebody explained it the other day, you don't understand their background. That can be a limitation. You don't understand their battles. You don't understand their burdens. And until you have all that understanding in somebody, it's still too early to judge. It's too early to say. So be patient with people who are learning themselves. I once remember when I was quite young as a teenager, I had a friend who couldn't believe that women can drive a bus. And he used to say that biologically, he doesn't believe there's something that women can drive buses. And he said in those countries where they do, it's just to prove a point. This was after a lot of debate. And that person is not somebody who's trying to put you down. It's just really somebody who's not exposed and who needs some work, yeah, to do some of their work. But then the two areas, but that's bias. And then the other place where women, of course, have some challenges is around balance. We still have some roles that make us have to do more labor, emotional labor, other labor, that's sometimes still uncompensated. So you can't go out saying that because I am empowered and I understand what power I have, what's in my hand, it doesn't mean that the solution then is to deny that you'll come against bias, or you'll have to really think carefully about balance in some stages of your life. Huh? And there's ways to address that, which we can talk about at another time. But that's the way that I think about it. But the headline is really that I'm so excited about being a woman. I love what it means and what it brings. And I really am excited about our future as a gender, and also the opportunities that our empowerment is bringing to men as well, because it's freeing them too to get out of a very limited role and be able to also express themselves and come more wholly into what their life vocations and missions are.
Dr. Laila, thank you so much for talking about this very interesting topic. And it touches a lot of our hearts here at Impact Africa because we're all about women. As you can see, power to our women. We think, we know that women, we build things on the shoulders of women because women are more collaborative. Okay, I'm not trying to compare anyone, but let me just say we are passionate about the things that we believe in. And I really love that you talk about the narrative, how we choose to take the narratives that empower us, take us forward. Thank you so much for those insights. And Dr. Laila, I just want to ask, has it been different from when you started your experiences? Has the scenario been different when you started and right now? Is it different or is it still the same?
It's already in just my lifetime, in my adult life, it's already night and day. You saw recently that Kenya was actually counted as one of the countries that's actually doing quite well on having women on boards. I think even though we might not have it in legislation, Kenya does provide a lot of opportunity for women. I think this is replicated globally. I think the bigger change, though, is if you look, as I said, if you look at my grandmother who got married at 16 to my grandfather who was, over 10 years older. And then you look at my mother. My mother was a senior banker at the central bank in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And in those days, if you were a woman, you had a completely different contract. You were always a contractor just because you were female. And there was no space to bring yourself into the role. You had to really keep trying to de-emphasize your gender. And then you look at us who are now in the market, and here you don't have to hang your head. You don't have to. You can really bring excellence to the table. They still did in previous generations, but we can be more free. We don't have to worry as much. So it's night and day. And in the last decade, even it's really changed. We're all much more aware. We're much more supportive of women, and we're really understanding the strengths women and diversity in general bring to a team.
I mean, that's very encouraging to hear. It means there's progress.
Yes, yes.
Joy. Okay. Let me just take this opportunity to remind our audience that you can interact with us. You can ask us any questions. I know Dr. Laila is talking. She's speaking gems right now, and she's touching every woman out there. And thank you so much, Dr. Laila. We are learning so much from you. I mean, I'm so happy that I'm getting this opportunity to talk to you one on one like this. I mean, the power of the internet. So yes, you can interact with us on Twitter at IAN, IAN Network Tweets. You can ask us any questions, and you can use our hashtag Power to Our Women and hashtag Women Lead. All right. As we wait for the audience questions, Dr. Laila, just one other question for you. What industries do you consider ripe for investments right now locally?
Mm. So this question is challenging because one of the advantages of being a developing country, as we're called, or countries that have lower incomes, is that we're also emerging markets, and that term actually is a very powerful term because it means that if it's real estate, most of our building has not yet been done. If it's growing food and agriculture, most of our agriculture, what we have now is maybe 0.1%, just a random figure of what it is that we will be. Whether it's our health system, every time we complain that health or education is broken, or data is broken, or any other field, transport, all of these things, that brokenness or that state of being nascent means that the opportunity in each of these areas is there. And so the question is really so when people ask me where can you invest, I'm like, this is Africa. It's where do you want to invest? It's so open. I mean, the issue is really choosing a business, as I said, that inspires you, and then setting up a business model where you're able to thrive both as a business and as an individual. There will be tough days, and preparing for that. But overall, for me, my choice is really social impact. I like to invest in health, education, data, finance, those empowering sectors. But it doesn't mean that agriculture is not right, or transport, or something else like that, right?
Yes, I agree, Dr. Laila. I mean, it's good to hear that you're open to businesses. So whichever opportunity comes your way where you feel you can invest, you do, right?
Yes, yes. I think I would clarify a little bit. So for me, I do if it's for an individual considering investment, I would say this is Africa, look everywhere. If it's me, I do tend to have a bias. For me, my biases, as I explained, are health and education, data and finance. Those are the areas I really like. And for education, I also have a bias for kind of learn and work, getting people into employment. That's the lens that I like. Once in a while, I do invest in other areas, usually with other people, because I do believe it's good to have expertise, not to just be random and casual about the way you approach things. So I am a member of angel investment groups where together we invest in opportunities together, but you usually have an expert on the group alongside. So that's the way that I look at the opportunities in this market.
Okay, so you're biased to a few industries.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so one question we have a question from the audience that I think we should address, and I'm glad he asked this question is from Kefa Mutuma, because you had talked about it earlier about your mistakes. He asks, what are some of your past mistakes in your businesses that you have learned the most from? Thank you, Kefa, for that question.
Thanks, Kefa. Where to start? Where to start? So I think one of the mistakes that I made very early. Um, so one was building a business for myself, assuming that because I would buy a product or service, or I feel that there's a need, everybody else feels there's a need and there's a market for it. So, one of the things you've really got to check is make sure that you have a large enough market, as I said earlier, of people who are ready, willing, and able to buy. I'll give an example. So, I used to do building, real estate development. And sometimes you'll go into a development thinking, um, the kind of house I want to build is the kind of house I'll live in. It has to have this, it has to have a fireplace, it has to have a pool. And then you build that. And then you realize once you go into it that the number of people who can afford such a product are very few. So I usually recommend that you move backwards. You do your research and you understand what are the kinds of houses, if it's houses you're building, that people are buying and that are moving like hotcakes. Remember the expression I used earlier. So, are people buying? What does the market demonstrate that is there? You can do this by looking at competitive supply. So, look at products or services similar to yours that are already in the market, similar to your idea, and see how they're moving. And that will tell you a lot about whether there's a market for that project. There's a lot more you can do. But overall, do not build just for yourself. Do not create something because you think you would enjoy having it with you as a customer. So be disciplined. I also think that in past businesses, I was a bit too bullish. The thing with entrepreneurs and creatives is that in my early businesses, I used to come in thinking everything's going to work out. Here's what the upside looks like, which is good. That's how entrepreneurs are. But now, as a more seasoned investor, as a serial investor and entrepreneur, I'm also very sensitive to the downside. I understand risk. I understand wasting time, which and time is money and life energy. So I'm much more careful now when I'm going into a business about how much could you lose. In early businesses, I was also more, I remember one, especially when I was a builder, being very indifferent and cocky. I think that's the best word to use. Very not humble about politicians, right? So I would think we're going to do this business. I remember there was an election where I was saying, let the politicians finish their politicking so that we can get back to business. And what you've really got to understand is that these people and the macroeconomic environment and the way that politics is interacting, even global oil prices, even the American election, even China and their steel industry, all of this affects you. So you've got to really not be oblivious to the macroeconomic environment. You've got to learn about your market from a very macro level and be eloquent about the connections between that and your business. Those are just three. There's more, but we can stop there.
Yeah,
Okay.
Dr. Lala, thank you so much for talking about your mistakes, and some of the things that entrepreneurs can learn from. What I'm hearing a lot is market research, 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 research. It's not about you and you knowing you can buy the product, but can that next person buy the product and is it relevant? All right.
Mm.
Thank you, Dr. Lila.
Awesome. And we have a follow-up question from the audience also. And it relates to your experience abroad as well as here. So, Kefa asks, what things can you borrow from the markets abroad that local businesses can implement to grow into unicorn?
It's a great question. It's big again. I think one of the things that I did learn and that has really informed the way that I approach business now is the importance of market development. I mentioned earlier that I'm very committed now to building the ecosystem. When I first built my first real estate business, I was building apartment blocks. I had just come from real estate in the US. And it was a world of difference. In the US, you have very affordable interest rates that are stable and low. You also have a lot of information in the marketplace. So when you're making a decision whether to add a bathroom to your 3 bedroom, there's a place you can go and find out how much of an increase in the price that will trigger because there's so much data. If you want to sell to people of a certain age group, you can find out what they're buying. All of this is publicly available. So all of those things have helped me really understand that there's a big opportunity here to fill those gaps, either as data or even understanding that why this business sector or this particular part of the economy is inefficient is because what it doesn't have is this. And then you're able to position yourself to fill that gap or to aggregate or to give information B2B. There's all kinds of opportunities you see more clearly when you've been overseas. You also understand the role of finance. What can I do to help unlock some of the financing bottlenecks we have for students, for business people? For every sector, there's usually a finance need that you can solve. So those are some of the things that can help. Culturally, there are things, especially being from the US, that really make a difference. Americans, more power to them. And I love it about them is that they're so expansive. They believe anything, in general, anything is possible. You can usually do win-win. If I make money and you make money, we're all good because there's enough to go around. And that's an attitude that I feel would really do well if we could foster it in our ecosystem, where people always think that there's abundance. And so you can think long term, you can think win-win, you can think very big and big picture. That's something that I learned from overseas that I really bring into my businesses now. And it's really helped me in my progress.
That is amazing. I love, something you talk about that Kenyans could really, really use is building win-win businesses because we are always so scared. Like if I give
Mm.
this person my business idea, now they're going to steal it and all these things. And yeah, I feel like we need that cultural shift to understand that we can do these things win-win. And of course, the point on data, yes, we need to do more with data. We need to be even more open with our data because I feel like it's in silos. Like I will collect my data and just hold on to it for myself, and somebody else will do so. Like we don't have centralized places for this. And yeah, that's really, really great insight, Dr. Laila. Thank you. And just to hold on to that, with your learnings from abroad and now here, what are some of the common myths you think are holding us entrepreneurs back?
There are quite a few, and sometimes I'm sad to see the kind of advice people get. On Twitter they'll express a problem, and then the kind of advice they get, I'm like, no, don't tell her that. Of course, I try to stay away from giving advice because what I try to say is that for me, this is what has worked for me, and this is what I've learned. And you've got to take the wheat and leave the chaff, right? Like it has to really work in your environment. But some of the things that I've learned is that there's people who worry about their idea. I think you just mentioned it. So this idea that my idea is the business is a very common myth, and it's not just in our ecosystem, it's across the world. So entrepreneurs think that the value is in the idea, but that's not true. The value is really in execution. For those of us who are investors, especially angel investors, we get pitches several times a week from different people that we don't know. And many of them, if they don't talk to you and explain their idea, there's no way you can support them or guide them to go in the direction they want to go. I am not interested in running 20 different small businesses. So I'm not trying to steal your idea, really. And also, you might think that your idea is very unique without being aware that in that same year, I've seen 3 different people with your idea. So the first myth that people need to move away from is this idea that an idea is the value. Execution, it's whether or not you can take an idea and see it through to a place where you have a profitable business. So that's one. Another one is really that it's beneath me to work for anyone. So this is part of that real belief and romanticization we have for entrepreneurship. I already explained that there's quite a few illusions about how difficult it is. And you've got to really make sure that, jobs are great. When you're an entrepreneur, there's this idea that people have that now you're always on vacation and you'll just be rich. But actually, studies show in the US, and I'm sure the statistics are even more strong here, that if you have a job, for most people, you're actually better off in the long run if you have a stable job, at least one in the household, than if you're all entrepreneurs, because there's a lot of risks that comes with the return. I also think that when I'm going to a founder and investing in a founder, I do like somebody who's worked, who's had the discipline and humility of the workplace, because that actually puts in you some certain attitudes and skills that will really hold you in a good position when it's time for you to run your own business. You'll understand systems and processes, you'll know how to get on time, you'll know how to pitch to clients and the like. I also hear people saying never work for free. And that one is another one where I'm like, don't tell people that, because working for free, or people, Kenyans say you can't eat exposure, right? um, but it's not that. You actually can, because exposure, there's many people who pay a lot of dollars to get PR. So if you do a partnership with a big brand, even if they're not particularly paying you, but you're offering something, then you get to the front page of the newspapers. There's people who are paying 3 million shillings a page to get onto that page. So being able to do things strategically with partners, even if you're not getting paid today and you're doing brand building and you're building networks, it's really a great investment. For me, it's worked a lot. Position yourself as a thought leader. We also say with some of my partners, give, 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 right? Don't think that every hour of your time, every idea you give must be paid right then. It's about positioning yourself as a person who's an answer, who has solutions. And you'll see that over time, if you're consistent, if you're excellent, if you have integrity, people will start to come to you. They'll remember you. It's not everybody, but it's a very good investment. Those are some of the things that come to mind immediately.
Oh, that's super awesome. It reminds me of something we usually say at Impact Africa Network, which is, you play the long term games. I think as
Mm.
Kenyans, sometimes we are just super short sighted. It has to pay today and today alone, and I'm not taking tomorrow's business. So I hope all our listeners can, relate and apply that in their day to day. And as we continue with our audience questions, I can see that Mathenge has a question. It's related to the conversation we were just having on data. And he's asking, what strides can be made to share data in our ecosystem, considering, it's in silos?
Mm. It's a great question, Mathenge. I think over time, when I first came home, I would say this was about 15 years ago, it was really unusual for people to collaborate. We had associations that were building up. Some sectors are better, like the Kenya Association for Manufacturers is miles ahead. They've been around for a long time. But what's happened more recently is that these industry associations or the tech ecosystem are starting to pool data. In the beginning, it was that barrier we had where people really thought, if I share my idea or what's happening in my business, people will use it for competitive advantage. But now over time, we've started seeing that there's different ways to pool data. It can be anonymized. We can do surveys that we then give back to the ecosystem. And I think as people start to understand that execution, not the idea, is the strength, then there's ways in which collaboration is becoming much more common. There's some sectors I understand, like even in the agricultural sector, there's some sectors where the market is so big, we'll never be able to service it ourselves, right? So we might as well just help each other get better, collaborate more, and move more fast together.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Laila. I think I will go next. I hope, Madenge, your question has been answered. And if you have any more questions, I'm sure we'll find a way in which you can reach Dr. Laila for more questions. Dr. Laila, now we are going to a very interesting section where we want to ask you quick fire questions very quickly because time is not on our side, unfortunately. So the first question is, what are some key success factors that you have been able to grow as, that have helped you to be able to grow as an entrepreneur?
Okay, so the first is getting as much education as I can. Um, the other is experience. Those have really helped. For me, a very critical success factor has been the support that I've gotten, not just from my family of origin or my family now or my friends, but so many people have stepped up in many different ways to help me get where I'm going. So I've had a lot of support.
Thank you, Dr. Laila.
Right, on to the second quick fire question, really quickly. What key activities would you recommend entrepreneurs to invest their time in?
Okay, so very quickly, at a personal level, I would say the first investment and activity is investing in yourself. Get some sleep, go easy on the alcohol, walk if you can, and don't abandon your relationships. There's a friend of mine, a very wise friend, who says, you are the asset as the entrepreneur. So don't think you're building an asset outside yourself. If your energy is high, the business will do well. Outside, and have a spiritual practice, some kind of spiritual practice. I'm not saying you have to be any particular religion. You can be a stoic, you can be a yogi, whatever it is, but have something that centers you back into making a connection with your existence. For the business, invest in systems and processes, keep documentation, keep metrics, and invest in good governance. When you're talking to an investor, it's going to really set you back if you don't have those things in place.
Okay, my last question is: are there any books that you could recommend for entrepreneurs that you feel they need to read, like right now?
Sure. So if you're starting out, the usual ones are Lean Startup, of course, because it forces discipline. There's also something called the disciplined entrepreneurship, right? So coming at your business the way that I've said, not juakali, not casually, but with fear and trembling, right? So that's the first thing. If you want to scale, so maybe you have a business, you've now assess that actually you're in the right segment, there's a good total addressable market, and you're in the right place and you have a passion for this thing that you're doing. Then there's some books. There's one called No Man's Land, which is what to do when your business is too small to be small and too small to be large, too large to be small and too small to be large. And you're thinking of scaling. Another one is called Build to Sell. Those are really my go-to books. They talk about creating systems and processes that your business starts moving to a place where it can thrive without you. And linked to that is something called Founder's Mentality. That's another book that's very helpful. If you're in the business and you're running it, this is, you've decided to start, you're now trying to scale, but you need some advice about how to run it day by day. There's some books by Lencioni, including one called The Advantage, that teaches you how to think about aligning your management team so you're all in the right direction. And there's also The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Horowitz. That's another one when you're really in trouble and you need somebody relatable.
Oh my God, Dr. Laila, you're talking about books that we actually read at Impact Africa Network. We have a book club. So we normally read such books, and we're so happy that you're mentioning some of them. But we'll definitely look for more that you've mentioned today. Thank you so much, Dr. Laila. I see that you see that you're talking about the importance of books for every entrepreneur.
Very
And
important.
yes. So, Dr. Laila, I would like to summarize this session because time is not on our side. Unfortunately, we've come to almost the end of this amazing lunchtime goodness. I'm going to say goodness because it's been awesome. But before I do that, I think, Dr. Laila, if there's any last thing you'd like to say, this is the time.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for having me. I want to encourage you to keep going. You are a blessed generation to be young people in Africa at this time. There's no time in history that has had so much opportunity for Africans. So I encourage you to jump in there, keep going, but be disciplined and be honest with yourself. You are the asset. You are the asset.
So be encouraged, be disciplined, and remember that you are the asset. Every woman out there, every man out there, you are the asset. And just keep going. Thank you, Dr. Laila.
Thank you.
Right, and we're just right about the end of the show, but I'd just like to remind you that this show is brought to you by Impact Africa Network, a startup studio in Nairobi. And just for the last 1 minute, I would love for you to hear some of the experiences from some of the fellows in the studio. And here's a short video.
First and foremost, just being a woman at IAN is an empowering thing. When I was coming in, there wasn't that feeling that I am disadvantaged by being a woman in this particular place, and that first and foremost is a good thing. But then also I've watched even the men at IAN rally behind the Power to Our Women initiative, that is designed to inspire the next generation of female leaders, and that in itself is just mind-blowingly inspiring, I'd say. And so I feel like the women are at the heart of IAN. We are just as equally trusted with projects as the men are, and I love it.
Wow, quite an inspiring story there by Grace. I'm glad she's enjoying being in the studio. And just, to emphasize, as a nonprofit startup studio, we are committed, really committed to changing the African narrative. And we firmly believe that women are very critical in this mission. And we are committed to providing them leadership opportunities in the startups we create. And so you can support this work through joining our micro donations program, where you can donate as little as $30 a month. It's a subscription, just like Netflix. You can go to our website, impactafrica.network. Up there, there's a green button for support the cause, and you can join us in this exciting movement towards changing the African narrative. Thank you for watching, and our audience, thank you so much for participating.
Thank you, Dr. Laila. Thank you.
Till next time.